We are at a historic and dangerous crossroads right now in this country. The Trump Department of Justice has openly declared war on the First Amendment, and the case that they have chosen to pave the way for criminally prosecuting journalists and publishers is that of WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, and they are doing it under the Espionage Act. It's the first time in the history of this country, the first time since the First Amendment to the Constitution was enshrined as law, that the government is criminally charging a publisher for publishing truthful information. This indictment centers around the exposure of war crimes committed by the forces of the most powerful nation on earth. It is about publishing documents that laid bare the blackmail, the backroom deals, the threats, the lies of the U.S. government in nations across the world. It is retaliation against an organization that presented to the world video evidence of a U.S. helicopter gunship massacre on Iraqi civilians and 2 Reuters news journalists.
You're clear.
All right, firing.
Line here, with state line out. Let me know when you gather. We'll shoot. Light them all up.
202 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire.
Hey, Roger.
This prosecution is revenge for publishing documents on the U.S. kill campaign in Iraq and Afghanistan, for publishing documents about torture and the creation of proxy forces in Iraq. But this is not just about WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. At the heart of the 17 Espionage Act indictments against Assange is the most extreme threat to press freedom and freedom of speech in the modern era. Not even Richard Nixon went this far, despite desperately wanting to criminally prosecute journalists.
I have never heard or seen such outrageous, vicious, distorted reporting in 27 years of public life.
The case against Julian Assange is a de facto prosecution of all publishers. If this succeeds, then the Pandora's box is open. Tomorrow, this administration could be going after the publishers of the New York Times or the Washington Post. They're already going after The Intercept, but this too could escalate to actually prosecuting journalists. This administration wants to put reporters in prison.
Comey tried to explain to the president that leak investigations are quite difficult for law enforcement because often you end up having to threaten to jail journalists. The president told Comey he should throw journalists in jail.
The New York Times was a publishing partner with WikiLeaks. It did story after story after story on the documents provided by U.S. Army whistleblower Chelsea Manning, which is what this case is about. So too did The Guardian and Der Spiegel and dozens of other news organizations. Are they going to get indicted next on espionage charges? Think about that. Really think about that, because that is where all of this leads. This is a precedent-setting moment of grave historical and moral importance. And this prosecution is what people like Dick Cheney have long wanted, to criminalize journalism that holds war criminals responsible or exposes their crimes for all the world and the American public to see. It's part of the worldview of people like the current Attorney General, William Barr. He's a militant believer in extreme executive power and the theory of the unitary executive. This is a do-or-die moment for free speech and the free press. Trump likes to talk about how he believes there was an effort to take down the president or engage in a coup. But the coup is happening in front of our eyes. It's nothing short of an attempt to overthrow the Constitution of the United States of America. And officials like Mike Pompeo, who ran the CIA and is now the Secretary of State, laid the groundwork for this by painting WikiLeaks as a terror-type organization, an intelligence service.
It's time to call out WikiLeaks for what it really is. A non-state hostile intelligence service often abetted by state actors like Russia.
In April of 2017, I interviewed Julian Assange when he was still holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy in London right after Mike Pompeo delivered his speech.
This is not how the First Amendment works. It's just legally wrong. The First Amendment is not a positive definition of rights. It's a negative definition. It limits what the federal government does. It doesn't say the federal government must give individuals rights and enforce that. It limits what the federal government can do to take away a certain climate of open debate.
President Barack Obama had no love for Julian Assange or WikiLeaks, but his administration ultimately decided not to bring this Espionage Act case, the case that Trump's Justice Department is now pursuing. Obama was terrible on press freedom. He prosecuted 8 journalistic sources under the Espionage Act. So why didn't Obama prosecute this case? Here are the words of the former Obama Justice Department spokesman, Matthew Miller. He said this in 2013, quote, "The problem the department has always had in investigating Julian Assange is there is no way to prosecute him for publishing information without the same theory being applied to journalists. And if you are not going to prosecute journalists for publishing classified information, which the department is not, then there is no way to prosecute Assange." The Obama policy was to throw the book at whistleblowers and journalistic sources, but as a matter of policy, they declined to take it a very dangerous step further and actually charge a publisher with publishing truthful information. Now, that is precisely what the Trump administration is doing. The Washington Post recently reported that 2 prosecutors involved in the case against Assange, quote, argued against the Justice Department's decision to accuse him of violating the Espionage Act because of fear that such charges pose serious risks for First Amendment protections and other concerns. Every single one of us should be extremely concerned about this case. Whether you like it or not, the battle to protect the First Amendment to the Constitution is also the battle to defend Julian Assange from the dangerous use of the Espionage Act. Failure to stop this prosecution will have far-reaching consequences. It could mean that journalists or publications that you read every day could be next. This administration is banking on the idea that so many people, including Democrats, hate Julian Assange so much that they won't raise a ruckus over this case. William Barr and Donald Trump and Mike Pompeo want you to hate Julian Assange so much that you will give up your own freedoms just to watch him burn at the stake. It's the same mentality that got us the Patriot Act, with only one U.S. senator voting against it. The same mentality that gave Bush and Cheney a blank check for war in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. Only one member of the House of Representatives stood against that legislation.
I am convinced that military action will not prevent further acts of international terrorism against the United States.
No one who cares about their freedom of speech or the freedom of the press should fall for this villainous tactic. Trump and his administration talk about journalists the way that Joseph Goebbels talked about journalists.
When you report fake news, which CNN does a lot, you are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
The fake news is, in fact, and I hate to say this, in fact, the enemy of the people. These are just dishonest, terrible people. I'm telling you that.
They want to lock up reporters. They want to shut down news organizations who aggressively investigate Trump. If you don't see this attack on Julian Assange under the Espionage Act as one of the most absolutely dangerous threats this administration has launched against the media, then you aren't paying attention, or you are allowing yourself to be tricked by Trump and his dangerous team of political prosecutors.